This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and I am joined by Dan for what would be a breakdown of some sort of breaking news, but I think something, Dan, that was very much worth discussing. So hello.
Hello. I was just saying to you before we started this that whenever we record another breakdown, once we're like, yeah, we're wrapped, that's it, there's not much new news, in the next 24 hours, something big seems to happen. So here we are for 2.0 this week.
Yes, I mean, for some people, this will be the third time we've been visiting their ears, depending on how they consume the content. So thank you to those who have chimed in. But this is one of those, Dan, that is definitely, I think, worth discussing on its own. We could have probably brought in a few other news items, but we'll keep those maybe for next week, that are kind of smaller comments and quotes on different stuff. But I'm going to try and say this properly, like we've said before recording, Dan, and I posted on socials. I really want to call this something else just because of what it is. But like I think you've mentioned really fairly to me again before we hit record, there's a reason for this. But anyway, what I'm talking about is Michael Schellenberg, who is a journalist, author, and professor, has an article out, and he's commented on the UFO topic for quite a while now. You've seen a lot of his posts, particularly if you're on X or Twitter. Sick of saying the same name twice. Yeah, if you're on Twitter, he comments on a lot of stuff on there. But yeah, he's basically published an article on Public, is the name of the forum, Public?
Public.news.
Public.news, wonderful. I'll put the link in the description. But Michael Schellenberger is this journalist, and the big headline here, Dan, really, really quick summarization before we get into the details, is Immaculate Constellation. Now, if I say Immaculate Conception, folks, I think I'm just used to the whole Virgin Mary, Jesus birth, that kind of stuff. But Immaculate Constellation appears to be the name of one of those top secret black budget special access programs that indeed is tasked with retrieving, tracking, and whatnot UAP, UFOs, crashed alien vehicles, Dan, essentially, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. It's purported that a whistleblower has come forward and given Congress a 25-page report on this program that he wasn't involved in. I should say he or she, because we don't know who they are.
Yeah.
They weren't involved in, but they came across something that flagged this up for them, and connected to this was all sorts of databases and so on and so forth. We'll get into it, but yeah, that's the overall kind of summary.
Yeah, so to go through, I've got some big chunks of quotes highlighted, Dan, to kind of talk through. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's a large chunk of the article probably, but split up, right? It does start off with a little bit of a footnote from Michael, and it focuses, for me, that these SAPs, special access programs, and elements of the intelligence community are not following their constitutional duty and informing Congress about their existence or even their true nature, if they are indeed known. And I think that's really important to mention, because that's the big issue being followed up here from a political point of view. And the likes of Chris Mellon has championed this from the beginning. The idea that, you know what, it's difficult to come out in the political arena or with serious journalists, serious academics, the serious mainstream media, and just talk about UFOs. And it's not quite that whole threat narrative that was one aspect of it. What we're saying here is there are elements within the US government that aren't being honest or going through with their constitutional duty, which is kind of so important in the US. So I think that's quite well to highlight that early on, because I think a lot of folks reading this who maybe aren't as big into the UFO thing would read that and think that's an interesting tagline.
Yeah, exactly. And we saw AOC zero in on that, you know, the constitutional requirements of these programs. And to be specific, basically it means that special access programs, whether they're unclassified or classified, they should be overseen not just by the executive branch, but by Congress as well. That's part of the checks and balances, and the people that oversee them, they're kind of called the Gang of Eight. And people might have heard these people referred to before by various people like Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, like you said, but it is required by law that they are briefed on intelligence matters by the executive branch. The Gang of Eight includes the leaders of each of the two parties, both from the Senate and the House, and the chairs and rank and minority members of the Senate Committee and the House Committee for Intelligence, which, as we know, they've been getting briefed by whistleblowers that have come forward. You know, Grush has put people forward. and so have other people to talk to these people. Now, I'm just going to reel off the gang of 8 just so people can, if you want to get angry and email these representatives, these are the people to talk to. You will probably, if you're into the subject, your ears will go up at a number of these names. So from the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, we've got Mike Turner and Jim Himes. Askapol have interviewed these guys. Mark Warner and Marco Rubio. Rubio has been connected to these UAP pieces of legislation for years now, since they started. Warner's been on it too. Mike Johnson and Hakeem Jeffries as well. They're the leadership in the House. And then we have the leadership in the United States Senate, which is Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer being one of the guys responsible for the UAP Disclosure Act. These are the people that have heard things from these very kind of highly qualified whistleblowers who would have access to these sensitive information. So the fact that these guys are pushing for the UAP Disclosure Act to go through means that they probably know something. And these are the guys that should get angry they're not being told, because as Michael quite rightly points out, it is constitutionally required that they be informed of these UAP study efforts, all the special access programs, whether classified or unclassified. These are the guys that should know what's going on.
Interesting. I'm going to read through, Dan, a couple of quotes, okay? And I've got these bunched together for a reason. Now, I want you to think that if in the UFO topic we hadn't had that New York Times article from 2017, and we didn't have Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, all those names that are kind of synonymous with the topic from the last 6 or 7 years. Imagine in the last couple of years we had just these, okay? So, and I'm quoting the article here. In 2021, former CIA Director John Brennan said, "I think some of the phenomena we may be seeing continue to be unexplained and might be some type of phenomenon that results from something that we don't yet understand and could involve some type of activity that some might say constitutes a different form of life." The same year, the current Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, said UAPs could constitute non-human intelligence. In 2023, a high-ranking former intelligence officer, David Grush, testified to Congress that the US government had retrieved spacecraft of non-human origins, which US government insiders told public was accurate. In 2021, John Ratcliffe, the Director of National Intelligence under former President Trump, said that UAP demonstrated, and I quote, "technologies that we don't have and frankly that we are not capable of defending against." And Ratcliffe said US intelligence analysts had high confidence foreign adversaries were not behind the famous Tic Tac UAP that 4 Navy pilots had seen. Right. So from 2021 to 2023, you've got former CIA director, current director of national intelligence previously under President Trump, and David Grush, former high-ranking intelligence official, all talking about aliens, alien life, non-human intelligence, and all saying that there's a good chance to there probably is to there is. That on its own, if you forget everything that had came before, in a way would blow that New York Times article out the water if we just had that on its own for me. That's huge in terms of imagine just that dropping and the impact that could or would have had we not had what we've already had. I said had a lot there.
Had.
Had.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this is we always talk about how this period of time is going to be looked at in the future, down the annals of history. And it's going to be something like that, where all of these day-to-day subtle kind of, Twitter bickerings and he said, she said, it's just going to melt away. And these are the statements that are going to just sit with us for the rest of time, because we always ask people, what does disclosure mean to you? Have we reached that bar? And Peter Lavender quite rightly points out, people aren't taking yes for an answer. We've been told we're not alone in so many ways by so many highly qualified people who all have access to this information. And just it's not good enough for some people. And yeah, it always makes me wonder, what is good enough? Who are people going to listen to these days? It's a difficult problem to overcome. But I would, like, for me at least, the knowledge that we are not alone, we've gone over that line. And now it's just debating, who are they? What do they want? What does NHI mean? Could it mean AI or something like that? Yeah, the big statements, big statements.
You sort of touched on this before, but another headline from this is the report was provided to authorised committees of Congress and their staff. You mentioned one of the individuals, one of these whistleblowers that's coming forward, is a current or former US government official acting as a UAP whistleblower. The person has a written report, Dan, like you said, was 25 pages, that the executive branch has been managing UAP or NHI issues without congressional knowledge, oversight, or authorization for some time, quite possibly decades. Furthermore, these individuals have revealed the name of an active and highly secretive DoD unacknowledged SAP, unacknowledged Special Access Program, or USAP. The source of the document told public that the USAP is a strategic intelligence program that is part of the US military's family of long-standing, highly sensitive programs dealing with various aspects of the UAP problem, and public is revealing its name here for the first time, Immaculate Constellation, as we said.
You are officially flagged and monitored by the NSA now.
And half of UFO Twitter, it seems. I
And
think everyone.
yes.
Yeah, and worth noting then, so Michael Schellenberger said, didn't he, on Joe Rogan, he's been on News Nation with Ross Coulthart as well, and on his article, that just publishing that name could flag you from a government surveillance point of view under, was it Official Secrets Act, something similar? What
Yeah, it would. I can't remember the exact act, but you know, these
something like
things
that.
would have filters. If you Google them, if you say them, it's easy for them to be flagged up. You know, we go back to look at what Edward Snowden showed us. All of communications across the whole globe are monitored. So even saying Immaculate Constellation, I'll say it just so I'm there with you being watched. Hello, CIA, if you're chiming in, thanks for watching. Yeah,
Hello, Mr. Semivan.
yeah, just Semivan, just there, just chilling. Yeah, it means that name, part of the process now would be that the name would be changed. So if it was this at one point, it would be changed and more security measures would be implemented. So that kind of brings us to, you know, if you were to ask the DoD about this, as Liberation Times did, they would not only be required by law to deny that the USAP exists, because that's just what they have to do, that's part and parcel of it, but technically they're also not wrong because the name would have changed.
Yeah, and I messaged you, didn't, at the time, to say that, like, I get where journalists have to, well, they message the DoD to ask about these. It just seems like a pointless or thankless task, because what do they expect them to say? And I think Tim McMillan quite rightly pointed out that legally they have to deny it. So it's a bit of a thankless or fruitless.
Like, what are they going to do? Like, oh, you got us. Yep, that's the UAP program. I guess you should have all the information now.
You got the magic word. That's fine. So it's well done to Tim McMillan on that, and it's nice to know those kind of things as well. So it was created after the 2017 New York Times ATIP article, Dan, as far as we're aware and what's been reported. Another quote from it, and this alludes to what you mentioned before, Dan, about what they've got. The multitude of wavelengths collected by these sensors, the report says, have captured UAP characteristics that are difficult or impossible to observe with the human eye alone. Subtle atmospheric effects associated with UAPs are also visible through the sensors employed by the US military and intelligence agencies. I wonder, is that some of the stuff where maybe even if they're filming these things at a bit of a distance, some of these sensors can show that something's been warped around it? You know, if these things indeed have gravity bubbles or whatnot, we see a video of a Tic Tac, for example, and the video we've got is the object go fast, going shooting across the top of the water. They may have other videos, or it sounds to me like of UAP at least, maybe the Tic Tac, that shows the atmosphere being warped around it or something being given off that we don't see and you wouldn't see with the human eye. And that's the kind of stuff, again, that we're not hearing or we're not seeing be released, but we hear exists as well. I think it just
to
go on.
Play devil's advocate on that. It could also be that just, you know, if there's an exhaust coming out of a plane, we can't always see the effects of it, but there's all these, like, you know, fluid dynamics going on with the air around it, that it just gives them more insight into what the propulsion is, the effects it's having on the environment. So it can be, you know, anything in between what I've just said and what you just said. Just stuff that's not seen with the human eye, anything in infrared, just heat-based, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, 100%. The report concludes, Dan, that the existence of Immaculate Constellation demonstrates the capability to detect, quarantine, and transfer. And this is the big line for me: quarantine and transfer, UAP and ARV, which are alien reproduction vehicle collection incidents, before they are observed and circulated within the military intelligence enterprise, thus serving as a means of enforcing internal information security. That's the big sentence for me is, detect, quarantine and transfer, UAP and ARV collection incidents. In other words, UFO crash retrievals.
Exactly. Take a mic drop. Huge implications. ARV for me kind of came up as a bit of a red flag because it's a term that's associated with the Stephen Greer, love him or hate him. He does say that a lot, but I was quite rightly corrected that it goes all the way back to someone called Mark McCandlish, who was an independent researcher who created the flux liner. If you do a Google on that, you'll see a whole bunch of like blueprints for craft that use these exotic propulsion. And we've been told that it's a hoax and that it was nothing to do with it. But, he is a term that he was using back then in apparently an official document.
Yeah, and again, that goes back to just because Stephen Greer or McCavendish or anyone that right now I or you or other folks listening to this don't buy into or associate with, and folks listening to this do enjoy the work of Stephen Greer and folks. So
Yeah.
I'm not, I'm just saying in general, if there's someone that you hear that isn't, well, no one's universally loved or believed in this topic, are they? It doesn't mean that aspects of what they say aren't true or false. That's Louis Zondo, Stephen Greer. I think I always like to use those two because they seem the opposite ends of the UFO conversation at times. One's the military intelligence guy, the other one's the doctor that hangs about with aliens. So, and I say that flippantly, but that's the kind of ends of the spectrum for me. So it doesn't mean that they're not right in some way, shape, or form, or we mentioned Bob Lazar, didn't we, a few days ago?
Yeah.
Elements of his story could be true. So that doesn't kind of, but I appreciate, like you say, it raises an eyebrow, doesn't it? Do you think, see, just like this section of the article where we're talking, because the larger article, again, the link will be in the description, it is behind a paywall, the full thing. So if you want,
it is. There's also one on News Nation, so link to that too, because that has a few more details without going into the paywall.
Cool. The idea, just before I lose my train of thought, quick Andy, grab it back. Oh yeah, so this piece where we're getting into the name of a program, and although what it does isn't really news, because we would expect a UAP crash retrieval program to go and collect, detect, and cover these things up and whisk them away. Do you think this is a sort of thing that was rumored to be reported by Blumenthal, Kane, Cooper at some point and didn't happen? And this is it just now being picked up by Schellenberger, or what?
It's quite possible. When you listen to all of these different interviews, you're quite right. In the public article, it says that this started in 2017. But listening to all the other interviews, it seems to be something that goes back decades, and the name changed to Immaculate Constellation in 2017. And it suggests that maybe ATIP was part of it, and it's part of a longer running thing. So this is definitely alluding to something more tangible. We're not just talking about, hey, maybe there's a legacy program anymore. I'm suspicious, I have this speculation. As much paperwork exists to show that the US has been studying this for decades. Now there's a name. Congress has a name that they can go and ask people about. John Greenwald can go FOIA this, and I'm sure hundreds of people are FOIA-ing everything they can get with this name. And once again,
surely that will return zero. And this,
I literally was just going to say that.
a fan of the FOIA protest, I don't care about. Say I don't care, right? What doesn't make sense to me is when I'll give DJ a shout out from Calling All Beings here, because I know we went back and forward on this for a while. The idea that there's a process in place, so it has to be followed. I'm sorry, you're literally talking about programs here that aren't being followed, that there are people in programs deliberately defying the US Constitution and their legal duties. That I'm guessing the penalties for this kind of stuff are pretty severe. So why would a FOIA request be followed through on if someone did FOIA Immaculate Constellation? Almost said conception that time. That to me is like, you've got people acting above the law or to their own tune, or their own laws. So they're going to just circumnavigate everything else, because ultimately what they're talking about, box ticking exercises don't matter. They literally won't give a shit about oh, there's someone's filed for the Dan. Someone sent us in a request for information on Immaculate, Constellation here. Should we send them it? And you're going,
They said the word, give them everything.
yeah, we probably should because they've asked for it. They've even named where the drawer is in the file, and the passcode for the drawer. Yeah, they're not getting information on that. But please FOIA it away because it's a good process when you get stuff from it.
Yeah, and you never know. As we said before, humans are in charge of these things. Maybe one day they'll make a mistake and say, yeah, 2 documents exist, and then they correct themselves next week to say 0 documents exist. That's something on record that will raise an eyebrow to them essentially not playing ball. And that's what we've had all these years. Greenwald has so much paperwork on his site, millions of documents. And whether he agrees or disagrees that these things are aliens or non-human intelligence, whatever, he always asserts the one thing you can prove is that there's just muckery afoot with this, that the US government are just not being honest. So we don't know what they're hiding and not hiding. And this is the issue, that they're not being transparent about it. And it's not like the US government has hidden things that they weren't meant to be doing before. They absolutely have. And we wouldn't know about them unless you know about them. And I know that sounds like such a basic statement, but it's so true. MK Ultra didn't come out until ages after it was, happening. Operation Paperclip and all of its associated programs, where they were bringing over Nazis from Germany to work on the rocket programs, they weren't known about until decades after. Area 51 was only admitted to when Obama mentioned it, and then it was confirmed as a real thing, and then they could talk about it. So we're looking at the tip of the iceberg with some of these things. We know that the US government doesn't play ball. I mean, most governments don't, right? We only know what we need to know. That's the phrase. Why do we need to know what Immaculate Constellation is? And this is another reason why I think the only thing they're ever going to tell us is we're not alone. They're not going to tell us everything that they know, because that means the adversaries have all of their information, and they'll play the national security angle. So it's important. It's important that we remember that.
So, and it also begs the question. I would presume, I would guess, that people involved within Immaculate Constellation or other USAPs of the kind would be highly compartmentalized themselves. So if you're someone, Dan, who recovers the tech, you're part of a black ops team that literally all black, midnight, gets dropped in some remote part of the desert into the ocean, Antarctica. You've got to go and recover this thing that we've tracked coming in quick. We've got an hour to do it before China, Russia, other aspects of the US military get here. Is your job to then take it back and start taking it apart? No, you literally know your job is to go and get this thing. This thing has crashed. Your job is to cover it up, blah, 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 lethal force, get it in the craft. You're disposable, dispensable. If we have to leave you behind, you're gone. Take the cyanide pill, if you want to go pure Mission Impossible with it. That kind of shit's probably, reasonable to assume. And then someone else has a job that is involved at looking at a bit of it. Again, I've went very Bob Lazar this week, but the idea that he had one very particular job to do on a certain craft, again, it would be taken back to a place, and there would be people there who have no idea where it's came from, what it is, but they're told, here's a recovered vehicle, a recovered something, you do this bit of work on it. Someone else then does another bit of work on it, and there's probably such a small number of people ultimately know the entire process. Even then, could it be there is one person knows the entire process, and that keeps them, the people below them, in the dark to some aspect as well, that again it's compartmentalized. It's probably ridiculous, but that level of secrecy, security is just paramount with this sort of thing, which I can totally get. I just wanted to add,
absolutely.
You mentioned before, Dan, this as well, but part of the before we get to the incidents mentioned, Immaculate Constellation includes high quality imagery intelligence, IMINT, and measurement and signature intelligence of UAPs, the whistleblower's report adds. The sources of this intelligence are a blend of directed and incidental collection capabilities positioned in low Earth orbit, the upper atmosphere, as well as military and civilian aviation altitudes and maritime environments. We have space, air, and water all covered within that as well. So again, that alludes to these things are up high, they are here, and they are down below. Too slow. So yeah.
That's exactly what I was just thinking.
Yeah. But yeah, can we get to some of the incidents, Dan? Because I've got a big chunk here. Let me read through, and you can kind of pick them apart for us, okay? So, The report to Congress describes in detail various UAPs from 1991 to 2022. I thought the date was interesting, 1991 being like a starting point. The most common UAP shapes reported in this USG dataset were spheres, orbs, discs, saucers, ovals, tic tacs, triangles, boomerangs, arrowheads, and irregular organic. The report describes various incidents found in the HUMINT databases. One involved orbs surrounding and forcing an F-22 out of its patrol area. The F-22 broke trajectory and attempted to evade, but was intercepted and boxed in by approximately 3 to 6 UAPs, according to the report. One UAP manoeuvred in proximity, greater than 12 metres, to the area directly starboard of the cockpit, where the UAP established a rigid spatial relationship with the F-22, maintaining its exact position and orientation parallel with the F-22's cockpit, despite multiple evasive rolls and manoeuvres. Surrounded by the presumed hostile UAPs, the F-22 was forced out of the mission area under the escort of the UAP formation. So just to talk on that one first, just for anyone not getting it, because I had to have a quick double read at it, they're saying there, this F-22 is flying along. This orb or sphere gets to a point where it's a distance from the craft and seems to almost lock onto it in some way, that no matter how that aircraft moves, it has literally got an invisible arm attached to it, and it is taking that everywhere it goes. So
as it goes up, down, spins around, does barrel rolls, it's saying where it was, which is really interesting. That this is one of those things where you can derive implications from that. It's invisible, so that means that it's probably electromagnetic in nature, whatever it's using to stay there. And it's suggestive of probably something akin to the mechanism ball lightning uses or something like that. Not to say it's ball lightning, because these things seemed intelligent, but using that kind of mechanism to just, I don't know, lock onto the frequency of a side of a plane or something. And that must be really scary when you're a pilot, because we just don't have stuff that can do that. Like,
that's not in the manual.
No plane. Yeah. No, it's not in the manual. And we heard, Ryan Graves talk about his squad mates who had one of these UAP fly between them. They come so close to aircraft. Even Graham was on the show last week, I think it was.
Rendell,
talking about some Foo Fighters incidents, and there were even Foo Fighters incidents like this, where the saucers or the balls of fire would just sit in exactly the same place and they just wouldn't budge. And it also makes me think of what you were saying about, what if they're like a window looking in, and it just sits there, and the spatial relationship to us is just different from their point of view. It has implications that you can kind of start digging into. Not confirmed, but you can dig into them. And yeah, it's really interesting. There was a really great depiction of this kind of thing in the Project Blue Book TV series. Each one kind of starts off with a UFO encounter, and it's the one over Washington DC where one of the orbs does this to one of the planes, and you kind of see it from the pilot's point of view. So I'd recommend, if you want a good visual of that, go search out that episode of the show and watch it. Not only will you be addicted to the show, but you'll kind of get a better idea of just how goddamn freaky it would be for a pilot to encounter something like this. It's intimidating, and you would leave just out of fear of your own life, not even talking about protecting the, $50 to $100 million thing that you're flying that the taxpayers paid for. And we've heard Dietrich and Fravor talk about, you gotta look after those things. You can't just dump them in the ocean. Like, these are expensive pieces of kit that you need to look after. So really, really outclasses, what the pilot was flying there, the F-22, right? And just, it's one of the best planes we have. So if this thing is just making child's play of that, eesh. We really have to be cognizant of the fact that if these things wanted to be a threat, they could wipe the floor with us, which does suggest that they don't want to be, right? But we should probably come up with some kind of defense.
Yeah. Operation Golden Domes, whatever it was called, Dan and Shane mentioned. Tell you what, just on that, I want to hear, and we're going to get to what next, okay? But Golden Domes and Immaculate Constellation, keep wanting to say conception, at the hearings. in November. Both
Yes.
sets of them. Like, they have to be asked about those. So yeah, in another incident, the crew of a Navy aircraft carrier watched a small orange-red sphere rapidly descend from a high altitude to 200 yards directly above the flight deck of the CVN aircraft carrier. The UAPs appeared to emit a soft orange-red light, which bizarrely did not illuminate the ocean or the flight deck of the CVN, despite the visual appearance of intense luminosity. The surface of the UAP was observed to be dynamic, rolling like the surface of the sun. That's really interesting. Something I've heard before are the fact that these objects, sometimes, some of them, the light doesn't reflect or appear on the ocean surface,
Uh-huh.
which is impossible as we know it from our kind of physics. But again, if we go back to that gravity bubble idea, would it lend that the light's being emitted, but whatever's surrounding these objects or these particular objects stops that light from escaping that area, which is why they don't see a reflection and whatnot. So really interesting idea.
Yeah, and that's also something that we saw in Colombia with the stuff that we filmed at the top of the mountain that the locals said were UAP or ancestors. That, you know, many different words for them, but these orbs were, and I say orbs just, you know, very loosely, they were balls of light. They were right next to a cliff face, and they didn't light up the cliff face. Yet they produced so much light that we could only match the effect they had with a 20,000 lumen torch. So a crazy amount of light we've had to pour out. And definitely would have lit up the cliff face. So yeah, again, there are implications you can derive from that, right? That's intelligence, and it speaks to why they're kind of keeping these databases hush hush, and why they're keeping them in the first place. Because, you know, there's probably a lot of engineers within the U.S. government or within these Immaculate programs that are kind of trying to use things like we're talking about and kind of go, okay, so we didn't think you could do that, but you seem to be able to. So how would it be possible? How could we make a weapon that does this, or a plane that does this, or whatever? Because if something can contain its own heat or its own light, then suddenly you can't track it with radar. And it's just incredible stealth tech. So you can get past enemy defenses and so on and so forth. Really, really useful, even if you can't make the full UAP.
And that's assuming that's a deliberate thing. It could
Yeah.
just be that, imagine meeting whoever it was that made it and going, oh, this is really clever because exactly what you just said, Dan. You know, we can't detect you. And it goes, oh, I didn't know that was a thing, but thanks.
Yeah.
Like,
That's it's worth talking about, because yeah, we have this very particular perspective on this phenomena, and while you're inside it, you might not realize what is outside of it, right? Similar to, yeah, people on speakerphone in public where they clearly aren't aware that other people can hear everything, right? But yeah, also interesting in this one is that the crew saying they felt like they stepped out of a trance when it disappeared. That means that the US government are tracking biological effects over time on the crew. Something that Lou spoke about, you know, the sixth observable, it's kind of loosely called. So they're looking at the effects that these things have on people. The kind of magma-ish surface as well, that came up in the Chuck Clark video. It's come up in so many other ones. Makes me wonder whether this is the Omaha encounter, because similar kind of situation where it was over the flight deck. But you know, a little more detail here, but less at the same time, I guess, because they don't mention what flight deck and so on and so forth. But yeah, you know, this database is being kept for particular reasons, to track these effects, to track what's happening, so they can backward engineer it or come up with defenses against it or use them as weapons. And this is also something, this database is also something that Sarah Gam of the UAPTF said was happening. So, like you say, it's something tangible that we can go searching for now. No longer are we just kind of throwing out speculation. This is something that we're like, yeah, there's a database there. Let's find it.
or is this the thing they've thrown out, Dan, to get us going after, to keep the
This is the question.
Yeah, that's the nightmare of the whole UFO topic, isn't it? Where
Yep.
anything that does come out, it's like, this is what they want us to go looking for. This is the left hand while the right hand's over here, you know. But that's one of the theories that UFOs are, that you see this thing here because they don't want you looking over there. So this light up object in the sky is a distraction. So, who knows? I do love the line, Dan, that one possibility is that AARO's work is a continuation of the US government's UAP public relations, not its UAP investigations. That's pretty spot on, and seems to be, even even mainstream journalists now are getting to that point, and that's talked about even with Rogan on his show, where he's like, there's a lot of disinformation and distraction and BS coming out with this, and at this point, it genuinely seems that's all AARO has been. Is it John Kozlowski is the new guy? Have I said that right? Kozlowski?
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Close enough.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
break you. John Conception. Let's just go with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. The Immaculate John. So yeah, he has a lot of work to do to turn around. Well, actually, do you know what? I say that. Do they care at what the public perception is of AARO? Because it's not a public organization, is it? It's there to do a job for an aspect of the government, which I appreciate is funded by taxpayers' money, etc. They work for the people. But given what we're talking about here, are they looking going, oh, our public facing, reputation isn't particularly great? Do they care?
It's a really good question. Since AARO was founded, even AIM-SOG, however you say that word, it was a mouthful.
Yeah.
They seem to be founded to manage public perception of this issue and to explain these cases away, just like Project Blue Book was accused of back in the day, and all of these other projects. And Hynek very famously, Hynek worked for. Sorry, I always forget that people might be listening to this that aren't into this subject.
Yeah.
Hynek led Project Blue Book for a time, and he eventually left. And after kind of coming up with the swamp gas thing and all of that kind of stuff, he completely changed tune when he actually got out of that program and could investigate these free of whatever shackles were there. And this is something that could happen again. Sean Kilpatrick doesn't seem to be going that way. He seems to be towing the company line, and he was asked to come in to do a job. So yeah, the US government want people to sleep safe, or to think they're sleeping safely in the house at night, despite UFO threats, despite Russia probably being at the red button, and all these adversaries being at the red button ready to attack at a moment's notice. Their job is to help people sleep at night. And yeah, they're doing that. They're explaining these things. Well, they're not explaining these things. They're explaining them away.
Yeah. I really appreciated, and we're getting towards the last kind of quotes I've got. It is actually the last quote from the article, folks, here. And I would encourage people to go and read it themselves. I know a lot of folks like, when me and Dan come on and talk about this stuff to save them the hassle, but always encourage you, just in case we get something wrong or a bit of context, or we've shared some opinion that you now think is gospel, go
or
and check
even
it
miss
out.
something. Someone can read something in a completely different way to what we do, and
I don't know about
blow
that,
our
but,
minds.
Yeah. So the program, the James Fox documentary, got a nice little nod towards the end of the article as well. And I'll quote for the final time. And now, in a forthcoming documentary, the program about the US government's alleged UAP retrieval program by James Fox, Kirk McConnell, a 37-year congressional staffer for the US Senate and House Select Committees on Intelligence, describes the testimony that members of Congress and staffers have heard. We have sources who have asserted not only that there have been crashes, said McConnell, but there have been crash retrievals. So it was nice to hear that get mentioned at the end. I don't know if this is a little conspiratorial in a good way, but it seems to me that between Lou Elizondo's book coming out, the James Fox documentary, this article, the hearings happening, another documentary series that might be starting in a few weeks in the US, there's stuff happening in the States all at one time. And this last couple of months of the year, well, let's go back maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago as well, to bring in Lou Elizondo's book, has started another wave and peak of interest that will probably roll through to. I really hope James Fox's documentary can get out sooner than later. Not that that'll be detrimental. I just think it can probably benefit from a bit of a wave of momentum, and that it's another time I think the public's opening the door to look in and go, wait a minute, this UFO thing that we've not had since Grush. So I think it's a really good time for that kind of stuff to kind of hit on all fronts. And if it culminates with these, and we'll get to it in a second, additional whistleblowers coming forward to speak at the hearings.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And there's also another event that, just because you mentioned McConnell there, I'm just going to touch on. The Sol Foundation mentioned that they're doing their event, and that's on November 22nd to 23rd at the Ford Mason Center, San Francisco. And you can go on their website and you can ask to, get an invite. But some of their guests are real interesting. And there's a few in particular, including Kirk McConnell, who are going to be speaking, and they will speak more freely. This is where we had Carl Nell talking about, catastrophic disclosure and controlled disclosure, and kind of, again, throwing fuel on that fire. But another person on this list that, another two people even, that are going to probably bring some heat to this is Dr. Eric Davis, who has long been associated with the UAP subject. So he's going to finally be able to kind of open up a little bit. But as well as that, we've got Dr. Stephen Finley. He's the chair of African American Studies in Louisiana State University. He's kind of taking the approach of talking about, the spiritual side of things, kind of going back through indigenous populations. That'll be interesting. But as well as that, there's this little name on here that not many people will know, but I expect is going to become a big deal. Eric Schrock. Eric Schrock was the former deputy director of technology development and integration at Lockheed Martin. And if you go back in Tom DeLonge's posts on Instagram, you can see that he's attending a Blink-182 concert with Steve Justice, and Tom gives him props as one of To The Stars' advisors. Now, the advisors we've never really known the names of, so as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the, To The Stars' Academy of Arts and Science advisors for the first time coming forward to talk to us. I'm real excited to hear what he's got to say. Even, even if he doesn't say a lot, like massive implications that Lockheed is joining the conversation, could be seen as a whistleblower, an insider starting to come out and talk.
Oh, sorry, I thought, is that you? Cool.
Yeah, that's it.
Cool. I missed my chance to say School of Schrock there then.
Oh, nice, yeah.
But no, there's some really interesting names. And I'll just throw in to add to that, and I'm not recording with him until later today, but Stephen Brown, philosophy teacher, who is a philosophy professor, who's got right into the UFO topic over the last few months. He's staying on board, and we're going to talk about he's trying to get more academics together to discuss this in a serious way, with his new organization, the Visible College. So folks will be aware of the Invisible College, which is talked about by Jacques Vallée and others. So there'll be more information on that. And again, I think it's good to see stuff like the Sol Foundation will get the attention of other academics, scientists, those types of groups that we want involved in the UFO topic. And that's not to say they're all going to come along and stick, but I won't name other organizations or groups, because fair play to anyone who gets involved in the UFO topic and wants to help in a serious way. I think it's far better to see academic groups spring up who want to get involved in the UFO conversation than other types of organizations who want to get involved in the UFO conversation, but through a lens that can look a little bit iffy. But I don't want to start.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It can come across as being a little biased without even going ahead. The academic conversation is just gonna be like a lighthouse in the dark, as Gary Nolan likes to say. It's just gonna bring really intelligent people to the table to have this conversation in a serious manner, which is where we're at with the subject.
Yeah, and look at Stephen Brown, and not to go into it too much, but he got involved with the Nazca Mummy stuff because he thought, oh, that's really interesting, a little bit of a what if. He didn't come into it like, oh, I want to study these things and I want to do this. He came at it from a philosophical point of view that this sounds pretty interesting, and what if there was something to this? And it's intrigued him so much, and the people he's spoken to in a short time, that he's like, he's all in on this. He wants to be involved. So more power to him and other folks like that who really want to get involved in some fresh thinking, some fresh ideas. And the Sol conference is the kind of the head of that table for me now in terms of all these big organizations. Am I missing anyone, Dan, that you think would, if you had like a To The Stars that was the group for maybe a year or so before kind of things went the way they went, would you say the Sol Foundation would be like the main serious hub for the UFO kind of movement now?
Yeah, I would agree. It's
a bit of a committee almost.
Yeah, I mean, the name is, Sol is son, and I think it'll be the main thing that a lot of other organizations kind of orbit around. Yeah.
Lol. Yeah, I like that. So yeah, in terms of the article, Dan, really interesting. It mentions the hearings that are going to happen. So just correct me here. November 13th, we've got Nancy Mace, Representative Nancy Mace, chairing the congressional hearing. And
which isn't in the calendar yet, right?
No. And this is what I'm going to get to, actually, because the other one is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is chairing a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing sometime in November. I'd seen a rumour that was the 5th of November, but I've not seen anything concrete. And the 13th as well, like you say, that's still not concrete, is it? That something could shift these?
Yeah, it's all up for it's fluid, right? Like they clearly want other hearings. They've got them penciled in, but they're penciled for a reason, so that the date can be erased and moved. We could see these go back to after the new year, till after the election. We've had a few senators say via Ascopal that whether it happens after the election or before isn't really important, but it's just turmoil at the moment. The America is going through a lot of natural disasters right now. A massive election that's just flaring up to massive proportions. So yeah, it could be moved around just so there's a bit of clarity and calmness. There always seems to be something though. So I don't know whether they'll just kind of go for it or whether they'll give them more time to prepare, or for the new head of AARO to kind of settle in and get that report together ready for Gillibrand's hearing. I just don't know, but there are a few coming. They clearly want them, but whether the date will be moved, we just don't know yet.
Michael Schellenberger said on Joe Rogan's podcast, which literally just dropped yesterday, folks, which is, I think, the 9th of October. We're recording this on the 10th. That not only has the first source come forward to report this, but a second source has backed up the name of the program, Immaculate Constellation, and that the what's within this report is accurate. So he's got multiple sources. I think that's important. This isn't just one person come forward. And we might even find out maybe at the hearings that and the person who reported it, and they step up and talk about it potentially. I don't know, but I thought that was worth noting, certainly. And you kind of touched on.
Danny Sheehan as well said that they've had a few whistleblowers come forward with this program named 2, and that he wanted the hearings to focus on this, which for me, I'm not sure I'd want that, on the off chance that if it turns out not to be real, then that's a rug pull and the public will just switch off to this. But certainly one of the witnesses should definitely bring this up, and get it into the congressional record and get them looking at it. Because as much as Corbell has backed this as well, Jeremy Corbell, has said that this is something he's heard too, there is still a chance that they could all just be talking to the same people. So them saying like they're actual witnesses, they're not actually actual witnesses. There's a chance that that's happening. And also, and Joe Rogan said this, so I hate myself saying I agree with him right now, but I agree with him. If I was running this legacy program, I would be moving hell on earth just to get people to approach these well-intentioned journalists and researchers and congressional staff to just give them something to take up all their time and resources, that maybe it isn't real. Maybe you just want them distracted by this right hand over here, like you said. And we've got to keep that in mind. This is just a report, and this is what was said to have happened with Kona Blue, which was a proposed program that Bigelow wanted to run, and that's what ORSAP, or ATIP as Bigelow kind of saw it, would become, is this thing called Kona Blue. And through kind of games of telephones, some people thought that this was the program, so they went and reported it as if it was, and then it turned out actually this program never ran. So we have to be mindful of that kind of
As
approach.
far as we know.
As far as we know. And this is what makes it so difficult, right? It could be all nonsense, it could be all real, but this is why we need Congress to have this information so they can go and do their jobs, because they're meant to have access to this stuff.
Yeah. Rogan does get a hard time, Dan, and it was funny on the Discord chat yesterday. There was a bit of a split with people saying the same thing of feel dirty agreeing with Rogan or listening to Rogan. Other folks saying that I think you're probably on that side of things. I think, as you've just alluded to, I'm probably on the other side where I'm like, nah, I don't mind him. I don't listen to him too often, but when I do, I can agree and disagree with him quite fairly. But about 2 hours, 30 minutes into his interview with Schellenberger, he does like a couple of minutes kind of brain dump of his views at the minute on the UFO subject. And I thought it was very fair, and it covered a lot of bases. He said a lot of stuff that people like me and you sit here and say, and what we think is a reasonable, rational way of thinking of the subject. And it might not be, this isn't you, but your narrative, if you're listening to this or watching this, or your ideal way of discussing the UFO topic. But he's putting across what I think is a very good basis for a modern interpretation of where the UFO topic is, pro UFOs as well, pro disclosure. And I thought it was a really decent summary. So if anyone wants to go in, it's about 2 hours, 30 minutes in, and it's a couple of minutes with just Rogan going, I think this, I think this, I think this. And I was kind of like the little, monkey inside my head was going clap, 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 clap.
Same.
Smashing the cymbals, going, yeah, do you know what? For a guy who at times you can feel has gone off the UFO topic or flip-flops back and forward, he's just kind of sitting, spinning plates off his head, going, actually, on this, here's what I think. And I thought it was really decent. So I would advise people, go and check out what he said, but make up your own mind, obviously, as always.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And you're right, I am on the side that is kind of, I'm a bit dubious about some things Rogan says. But this is exactly what we were talking about. This is what we were talking about with bias, right? If I just write Rogan off and think, well, he said one thing that's bullshit, so I'm not going to listen to anything he says, that means I miss a whole bunch of good information when he's talking to UFO people. So I get it, but go listen to it. He's getting hundreds of millions from Spotify, whether you listen or not. It's not like you're putting food on his table. There's no harm in just listening to him. Just don't, I'm the same as you. I don't listen to everything that he does. When an interesting guest is on there, I'll go listen for the guest. But in terms of just often thinking out loud, in an age where people are very often, lambasted for thinking out loud, they might say something that is too far one side, even though, it was just an idea and they don't believe it. It's just they're pouring it out there for just a food for thought. I appreciate the space that he kind of maintains in terms of that approach. And people think, he supports Trump heavily and so on and so forth, and he won't have Trump on and things like that. So I bet there are some Rogan haters out there, I'll say, that don't even know that he doesn't want to host Trump because Trump puts limitations on what you can talk about. So yeah, I would say go listen to it. As Andy said, it starts at 2:30. And it's out of like a 3-hour, 15-minute interview, I think it is. So it's just the last 45 minutes. Chuck it on 2-speed or whatever, and yeah, you won't hate anything after that. It's fine.
Is this program the tip of the iceberg, Dan? Are we looking at this as the program, this is the daddy, or are we looking at one of many? Are we looking at, that spider diagram? Are there going to be loads of these? Where are you kind of sitting with kind of hearing about this?
So this is where there seems to be a little confusion in various bits of the reporting, because some places it says it started 2017, other places they're talking about the database is tracking from 1991 to 2022. So the study's gone on longer, but we can kind of, I think, discern some things by breaking down the program name. It's called Immaculate, I nearly said Conception, Constellation. And the way programs work in the DoD and the NSA uses this, National Security Agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the National Reconnaissance Office, that was a mouthful, all use this system that's called the NICA system. And it assigns random words to programs just so you can't discern what the program is. If I name it, Moving Star Initiative, then people are going to go, oh, a moving star, what's that? That's probably a UFO. You can discern what the program does. So they get these random code words assigned to them. And the way they break down is the first word is the block assignment. So that's the organization that is kind of responsible for, those programs. And then within that block assignment, you'll have different programs. So the block assignment here would be Immaculate, and the specific program would be Constellation. So there would be other things, I guess, called Immaculate Arm or Immaculate Tree or something like that, and they would all be looking at different facets of the same issue, and the organization itself would be called Immaculate, which is interesting. And I've seen some theories kind of trying to drive what it means, but I won't go into them because they're not meant to mean anything at all. There's a really good article on this on the Debrief and the War Zone written by Tim McMillan, where he goes into these classifications and security clearances and stuff, and you can learn all this. And I find it really useful because when someone comes to you and says, there's a cosmic clearance level, you can instantly go, well, that's not how things work. Everything's just top secret and it's just a compartment under that top secret. You wouldn't need to have a cosmic clearance level. You would just be compartmentalized under top secret. So yeah, I would say this was one facet of the Immaculate program that would have had its name changed now, sadly.
Immaculate along the same lines of Majestic? Like,
Yeah, and who knows? It could be Immaculate Majestic, right? Like that could be one arm of it. But it's interesting that we've got the word constellation here, and Zodiac was rumored to be what Majestic was called at one point. And Zodiac is star signs. You know, it's a group of 12 star signs and different ones. So could that be a model that they're running it on? And for all I'm talking about the Nika system here, this is an off the books program, so they might go, we're not using that system, we don't care, we're just going to name it what we want. But I like to be informed.
Zodiac was also a wrestler in WCW in the early to mid 90s, played by former Brutus the Barber Beefcake. So, yeah.
What was that Zodiac, the Zodiac killer?
It could have been.
Bit on the nose, right? But maybe that
could have been,
men
given
got
some
away
of his
with it.
antics back in the day. But yeah, sorry, wrestling aside. So what I want to know finally, Dan, given the UFO conversation and thinking where we kind of rounded things up at the last kind of breakdown a few days ago, what does this do in terms of the overall conversation now? I think we were kind of barreling towards what's looking like the hearings kind of coming up next. How does this news and its reporting, and I suppose we're still to see the next few days, how the reporting's influenced or spreads? I think one of the not issues, but the reporting online right now in mainstream news is all about Florida and the hurricane and whatnot. And it's kind of, as we record this, I think it's kind of getting the worst of it right now. So, hope everyone's okay, and thoughts to people out there, and hope it's not as bad wherever you are as it should have been or could have been. But that's going to take up a bulk of the news. Is this something that you see impacting a little more longer term, or is it just going to be the story's had its coverage now, and it'll go away? Where's it going to land?
So for me, this is going to be a longer term thing. We'll probably hear a lot of hoo-ha about it this week in the circles that we run in, because we all talk about UFO stuff. But this is going to go to Congress. Congress are going to investigate it. This whistleblower could show up in the hearings. So it's going to have an impact there for sure. Another area that I think it might have an impact is around whistleblower laws. Schellenberger in the article and all of his interviews talks about when he met this person, that he said there was like a palpable fear that they had, that they were genuinely afraid that they were going to suffer repercussions for this. And we've heard from people like Danny Sheehan and Lou that until better whistleblower laws are implemented, we're not going to see these people coming forward publicly because they don't want to show their faces because of what could happen to them or their families or whatever. So one of the pieces of legislation going through this year, and UFOs or UAP aren't mentioned in the legislation, but it is built around whistleblower laws and kind of strengthening them so that people don't know who they are. They're anonymous, and names aren't associated. So unlike with David Grush, where he made his report kind of early and came out swinging a little early because his name got out there. In future, hopefully there'll be some kind of law put in place that means that it's illegal to do that. It doesn't mean it still won't happen, but the more we can reassure whistleblowers that are coming forward from programs like this, that they won't suffer repercussions, that they don't have to be afraid for their life or their wife or their kids, or their dogs or whatever, the more likely they are to come forward. So I think we're going to see this impact the hearings. We'll hear this come up at the hearings from at least one witness, I would think. And also, we're probably going to get some strengthened whistleblower law language to kind of help these people out and to start turning these stones over.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to impact the hearings. I wonder, is this something that's come out now that's going to be a good thing, though, or can it have the opposite effect that the folks involved now have, 4 or 5 weeks to prepare, rather than this kind of thing being mentioned and spur of the moment and talked about? Again, though, let's be fair, that the idea of this being brought up at the hearing, I know you said you'd be disappointed if it was the whole focus. I think, and from my point of view, there's only so much they can say in a public setting. So
Yes.
a lot of what they can say would have to be answered behind closed doors. So yes, I want it brought up, but do I necessarily want this being the focus? I think at those kind of hearings, the focus needs to be on a little about a lot of stuff, rather than a lot of information about one or two things, because
Yeah.
you're not really going to get the good stuff. So you're better hearing little nuggets all along the way, going, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. I think like we had at the last hearings where you had the representatives all going around asking. So we had bodies, we had craft, we had bits of this, we had bits of that. You've seen this, we've seen satellite, lots of stuff that just gets kind of little answers and more intrigue off the back of it, because most of the juicy stuff, like you say, happens behind closed doors. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Almost exactly like you did at the beginning when you read Schellenberger's article and had those quotes. If those quotes were in hearing, it lights fires under people's asses to start digging into this in a serious manner. And that's just what we need. We need more senators, more staffers on board, looking into this in a serious manner. And we're getting there. We've almost got the whole gang of 8 as far as I can see.
Yeah, we're a bit spoiled in terms of news, I think, which, like you said quite rightly, Dan, at the beginning, given we just recorded a few days ago, talked about a whole load of news items. Here we are a couple of days later, and we're recording literally 1 hour now just on one particular thing. There's a few other things we'll talk about, but we'll leave that to next week, because who knows what more comes off the back of this. But just to finish off, Dan, I'd asked on the last breakdown if people wanted to send in any listener questions, I can add these things on. I got a few through, so thank you so much, and I'll keep loads of them for next week's recordings. But I wanted to include 2, because I asked 1 for listener questions, but 2 for people to send over, ideally via email, folks. So thanks those who did. Who your thoughts would be on the ideal candidates for a UAP advocate from the human race kind of thing, right? And I got a pretty interesting answer from Michael. I'll start with a question from Claudia, though, so discussion point, Dan. So thanks, Claudia. So again, if you want to send in, folks, email ufouapam@gmail.com any questions just in general like this. So have you ever wondered if the whole UFO or the whole secrecy surrounding UAP for all this time isn't human made, but some kind of manipulating our human brains thing by the ones who are flying these objects, aka extraterrestrials? If they've been here all along, among us or in the oceans, and we as humans have never really noticed, it must be their doing, right? Super creepy thought, but maybe worth discussion. So thank you, Claudia. Dan?
I'm going to mention Keel. So John Keel, way back, he was investigating these things. I think it's a great question, by the way. And something he noted was that Men in Black reports turned at some point and became something else. When the public started blaming the Air Force for kind of covering this up, all of the Men in Black encounters started to reflect people who were wearing very Air Force-like uniforms. So I think, sorry, what was the person's name that asked the question again?
Claudia.
I think Claudia's spot on here. This phenomena is reflective, and it's playing into our suspicions of it and each other, because it keeps us distracted from getting on with it. For all of the control we have, it has absolute control. Whatever it is, it could reveal itself to us now, or it could not. And it could just keep appearing. What happens tomorrow if it decides to start appearing as giant rabbits everywhere? And the conversation becomes about giant rabbits. It's a whole other issue then, and we've almost got to start over with the stigma, right, of discussing giant rabbits. So it can hide in plain sight in that way, and yeah, it's really interesting. I think we've got to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. I think it's a bit of both, Claudia. I think that there's an element of this phenomenon which is controlling aspects of it. Certainly the fact it's very hard to take pictures, get good photographs, videos, recordings, or any prolonged sighting, especially in modern day, would indicate some kind of manipulation. But I think there's very much a human element to it, as we see from the US Air Force, aspects of the US military, and US government, private sector. Just given what we've talked about here with the Immaculate Constellation stuff, I don't think that's phenomenon driven. I think that's humanity driven. I think that's military, that's technical prowess, weaponry. That's why that's there.
But here's a what if. What if that program has been infiltrated by whoever is flying these things, and so they're in control of that program too? It's just a what if. I don't have an answer, but I think our answers are very clearly woo is me and nuts and bolts is you.
But Bob Bigelow said, didn't he?
Both are important.
They're right under our nose. They're here already. You don't have to go looking far. So maybe it's as much as they have infiltrated in that sense. It's very V/ those kind of movies or ideas. But yeah, awesome. So thanks, Claudia. And Michael. So Dan, what do you think of this one? It's a little bit morbid, but just given the setup of it. So the idea of an advocate to represent humanity to go and address the Galactic Federation, whatever you want to call it, right? A human toddler around 18 months old, able to walk, but before they are fully speaking. Michael fleshes it out a little bit. I don't think there's anything we could say to a race that is godlike compared to us and maybe had a hand in creating us that would impress them or change their mind. There's probably no way we could really come across as clever or impressive to them using our logic and beliefs. Sending a baby would show humility as well as offer them the absolute best of what makes us a human, or what makes a human a human. A blank slate capable of becoming something amazing or something terrible. A baby would not be concerned with impressing or gaming them. It would want to be loved, comforted, and to learn. Any individual would be judged or open themselves to judgment, whereas a baby is the ultimate potential of humanity and nothing more. I think our potential is the only thing we could offer to alien life, who is thousands of years more advanced. It's our only hope. Pretty well rationalized and thought out.
I really like that answer. That was really unexpected as well. And you know, I'll put aside the fact that my niece cut my dog's ear off when she was like 2.
Wow.
So, but it speaks to the potential, right? A
Yeah.
baby is a blank slate, and you often see like kids interacting with animals. You know, if you just Google a bunch of animal and kids videos, they're really cute together, and there seems to be some level of communication there. And if you look at you know, psychological studies, how kids become aware psychologically over time of themselves versus the outside world, that happens way further down the line. And there's been speculation in some circles that maybe, and I'm going to touch on, I guess, like past lives and stuff like that. You know, when you look at those studies, that maybe we're a little more in touch with that kind of weirder side of the universe then. So there's some potential to kind of exploit that connection there. But yeah, and it makes me think of last episode we spoke about Elio, the Pixar movies coming out, where a kid is accidentally abducted as the representative to Earth, and it kind of plays into the same thing, right? The kindness and curiosity and fearlessness. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I would just hope that the baby we sent just didn't spend the whole time crying,
and that it's given voluntarily, because, you know,
yes,
I come at these things from a parental point of view where I think, oh my god, yeah. But I like the idea of, you know, would we create one as humanity and send it off? Would you have it given up? I don't know. And
you
then
send an embryo? Oh no. That I'm on a whole other track of thought now about abductions and things like 100%. That.
Dan, let's leave it there, because you know what? Speaking of being a parent, I'm going to go on the school run now. So awesome, good timing. Thank you
also
so much.
Thinking of Monsters Inc.
Yeah, well, yeah, pretty Monsters Inc. Go watch Monsters Inc., folk. There's your homework. And we will be back next week for no doubt more breaking news that happens over the weekend as soon as we hit stop. And we'll see what happens off the back of Michael Schellenberger's wonderful article. Go check it out in the links. And again, folks, we'll put the link in again for the hurricane relief stuff, and wish everyone over there the best of luck. All for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify, just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little.
That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify, just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer. A little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass.